They say the night shift messes with your mind, but I never believed it. Not until I started working at Walmart. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something was off. The air was too still, too thick, like the store was holding its breath. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, humming like a distant swarm of insects. It was past midnight, and the place was nearly empty except for a few late-night shoppers wandering the aisles like sleepwalkers. I tightened my grip on my backpack and walked toward the employee entrance in the back. I needed this job. Bills were piling up, and I didn't have the luxury of being picky, stocking shelves all night. Easy money, or so I thought. A man in a blue Walmart vest stood by the time clock, watching me as I approached. He was middle-aged, with a stiff posture and tired eyes that looked like they had seen too much. His name tag read, Mr. Lewis, manager. "You must be John," he said, not bothering to introduce himself. I nodded. "Yeah, first night." He handed me a small laminated card. "Read this carefully. These are the night shift rules. Follow them exactly." I glanced at the card. There were 10 rules, typed in small, bold letters. 1. Always clock in at exactly 11:57 p.m. Not a minute before, not a minute after. 2. If a shopping cart appears in an empty aisle, push it to the back storage room. Do not check what's inside. 3. At 2:45 a.m., take your 5-minute break in the employee lounge. No exceptions. 4. Never turn around if you hear your name whispered. 5. If the intercom plays static, close your eyes and count to 10. Do not open them until it stops. 6. If you see someone in outdated clothing standing in aisle 8, do not approach them. Notify Mr. Lewis immediately. 7. Do not go near the frozen food section between 3:01 and 3:07 a.m. 8. If a customer asks for something that doesn't exist, do not try to help them. They are not real. 9. If you find a door labeled employees only that was not there before, do not open it. 10. Never, under any circumstance, stay inside the store past 6 a.m. I let out a short laugh. Seriously? Mr. Lewis didn't smile. His face was stone. This isn't a joke. I glanced around, expecting the other employees to be snickering behind the shelves, waiting to see how I'd react. But there were no laughs, no smirks. The few workers I could see were focused on their tasks, moving quickly and keeping their heads down. Something about their body language unsettled me. They weren't just working. They were following the rules. Mr. Lewis clapped a hand on my shoulder, making me flinch. His grip was firm, his fingers cold as ice. "Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." And just like that, he walked away, disappearing down the aisles. I looked at the card again. The words seemed heavier now, like they carried something more than just instructions. I exhaled, stuffing the card into my pocket. Guess I better get started. I had no idea what I had signed up for. The first few hours of my shift were uneventful. Just rows of shelves, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the rhythmic beeping of the scanner as I stocked items. It was boring, but I needed the money. The rules Mr. Lewis had given me were folded in my back pocket, forgotten. Around 1:30 a.m., the store was silent, except for the occasional rustle of plastic and the dull thud of boxes hitting the floor. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and cleaning chemicals. I was stacking cereal boxes when I heard it. A whisper. Soft. Almost too soft. But clear. It said my name. John. I froze. I turned my head slightly, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the lights and the distant sound of a cart rolling somewhere in the store. I shook my head. Lack of sleep, I told myself. Just my mind playing tricks. I kept stocking, moving faster now. Then it happened again. John. A little louder this time. Closer. I spun around. Empty aisle. No one there. A chill crawled up my back. The store wasn't big, but the night shift team was small. I had only seen Eric in the last hour, stocking in another section. No customers. No reason for anyone to be here. I took a deep breath. That's when I noticed it. A thin layer of dust on the floor behind me. Not the kind of dust you see collecting in the corners of an old house. This was thick gray and swirling slightly, as if it had just settled after something moved through it. I stepped back, my heartbeat quickening. That's when Eric appeared at the end of the aisle. His face was pale, his expression stiff. "You turned around," he said, his voice tight. I frowned. "Yes-o." Eric walked toward me, his eyes darting around like he expected something to jump out. He grabbed my arm and whispered, You don't turn around when you hear your name. That's rule 3. I pull my arm away. Man, come on. Someone was messing with me. Did you see anything? Eric asked, cutting me off. I hesitated. No, just dust. He exhaled slowly, glancing over his shoulder. You're lucky, he muttered. This time, before I could ask what he meant, he walked away, disappearing into the next aisle. I looked down at the dust again. It was already starting to fade, as if it had never been there. I forced a laugh, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. It was just my imagination. That's what I told myself. But I didn't break any more rules that night. There was a rule about the carts. It didn't make sense to me, but none of these rules did. If you see an abandoned cart filled with groceries, do not look inside. Push it to the back storage immediately. I didn't think much of it until I saw one. It was sitting in the middle of aisle 12, perfectly still, as if someone had just walked away from it. The metal frame gleamed under the harsh store lights, and the wheels, oddly enough, were too clean. No scuff marks, no dust, nothing. Something about it felt off. I glanced around. The store was empty except for the other night shift workers, none of whom were anywhere near this aisle. There was no one who could have left it here. The hair on my arms stood up as I stared at the cart. It was filled to the brim. Boxes of cereal, canned food, fresh vegetables, and raw meat stacked neatly inside. Everything looked normal, yet something gnawed at the back of my mind. I shouldn't do it. I should just grab the handle and roll it to the back like the rule said. But I had to know. Slowly, I stepped forward, my fingers tightening around the cold metal of the cart's frame. I leaned over and looked inside. Instantly, my stomach twisted. The food inside wasn't fresh. It looked fresh, but the smell that hit me was rot, a deep, stomach-churning stench, like something that had been left out for weeks. My eyes darted to a pack of raw chicken, neatly wrapped in plastic. Inside, the meat was black. The bananas were covered in gray fuzz, despite looking perfectly yellow on the outside. The canned goods had no labels, just rusted metal with deep scratches along the sides. And then I saw something worse. At the very bottom of the cart, beneath the rotten food, there was a wallet. It was wedged between a moldy loaf of bread and a carton of eggs. The leather was cracked, old, too old. My hands trembled as I reached for it, heart pounding in my ears. I pried it open. Inside was an employee ID card. The photo was faded, but the name was clear. Mason Carter, night shift stocker. My breath caught in my throat. Mason had gone missing 2 nights ago. The manager said he quit without notice. But here was his wallet. In this cart. A chill wrapped around my spine like a vice. I didn't know what to do. I should have listened. I should have followed the rule. Then, somewhere behind me, I heard it. The faint, slow creak of wheels turning. I wasn't pushing the cart, but it was moving, and I wasn't alone anymore. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed faintly as I stacked another can of soup onto the shelf. My shift had been dragging, but something about the silence in the store felt heavier than usual. I glanced at my watch, 2:44 a.m. A strange feeling settled in my chest. I had been told, very clearly, to take a break at exactly 2:45 a.m., not a minute before, not a minute after. But why? I decided to ignore it. What could possibly happen? Maybe it was just a weird store policy, some corporate nonsense that didn't really matter. As the minute hand on my watch clicked forward, something changed. The temperature in the store dropped. Not gradually, suddenly. Like the air itself had been sucked out and replaced with something stale, something wrong. My breath came out in a thin mist, visible in the cold air. The buzzing of the lights grew louder, flickering like a dying candle. Then, the store shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a slight warping of space. The aisles, usually neat and symmetrical, seemed longer than before. The rows of shelves stretched too far into the distance, as if they had no end. I blinked hard, shaking my head. It had to be my imagination. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the end of aisle 8, completely still. He was facing me, but his face was hidden by the flickering lights above. His clothes were outdated, something out of the 1950s, a dusty brown coat, old work boots, a tilted hat that cast a shadow over his features. I felt my throat tighten. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding much smaller than I intended. He didn't move. I swallowed hard. My gut screamed at me to look away, to pretend I never saw him, but my body was frozen. The lights flickered again, and in that split second of darkness, he was closer. I staggered back, knocking over a can of soup. It clattered against the floor, echoing through the empty store. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I didn't hear him walk. I didn't see him move. But when the lights flickered again, he was even closer. His head twitched slightly to the side, like he was studying me. "John!" A voice hissed behind me, yanking me back to reality. I turned to see Eric standing there, his face pale. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength and pulled me away from the aisle. "What the hell are you doing?" he whispered harshly. "Did you see that guy?" I gasped, my pulse hammering. Eric didn't even look. "Shut up and walk. Keep your eyes forward." I obeyed, my legs stiff as we hurried toward the break room. Only when we were safely inside did he let go of my arm. He shut the door, locked it, and exhaled shakily. "You didn't take your break," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "That's why it happened." "What happened?" I demanded, still trying to catch my breath. Eric looked at me, his face tight with fear. "You don't skip the 2:45 a.m. break. Ever." "Who was that man?" I pressed. Eric hesitated, then shook his head. "That wasn't a man." The hairs on the back of my neck rose. "What was it then?" I whispered. He stared at the door, listening. Outside, the store was silent again. The lights no longer flickered. The air no longer felt cold. Finally, Eric looked at me and said something that made my stomach drop. "I don't know his name, but if you see him again, don't let the lights go out." The store was quiet. Too quiet. I stood near the frozen food aisle, gripping the handle of my stocking cart, my fingers cold and clammy. The overhead lights buzzed softly, their dim glow barely reaching the far end of the store. My shift had barely hit the halfway mark, but something felt off. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. The air smelled stale, like old cardboard mixed with something dry, something ancient. I hadn't noticed it before, but now the scent clung to my throat. Every breath felt heavier. I looked down at my hands. There was dust on them. Not the usual dust you'd expect in an old store. No, this was thick, grayish, almost ash-like. I rubbed my palms together, but it didn't come off easily. It felt gritty, unnatural, like it was clinging to me. I wiped them on my jeans and kept stocking the frozen food shelves, trying to push the unease away. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just the old vents blowing dust around. And then I heard it, a soft shuffling sound. Not footsteps exactly, something lighter, like cloth dragging across the floor. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance down the aisle. Nothing. The shelves stretched into the distance, untouched, rows of frozen dinners and ice cream cartons lined up perfectly. But the feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten worse. Someone was watching me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep stocking. "Focus, John. Keep your head down." I reached for a box of frozen peas, but my hands were shaking. The box slipped from my grip and tumbled onto the floor. The sound echoed through the empty store. And then the lights flickered, a slow, rhythmic pulse like a dying heartbeat. I turned my head a little more, just enough to see past the end of the aisle. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing motionless in aisle 8. It wasn't a customer. I knew that immediately. No one shopped this late, and even if they did, they wouldn't stand that still. The figure was barely visible in the dim store lights. The shape of a man, tall, thin, wearing something that looked wrong. The clothes were outdated, like something pulled straight from an old black and white photograph. A dusty brown coat, a pair of slacks that seemed to blend into the shadows. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, locked in place by something I didn't understand. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, just a blink, he moved. Not a normal movement. It was jerky, unnatural, like someone skipping frames in an old VHS tape. One moment, he was standing at the end of the aisle. The next, he was closer. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The freezer doors behind me vibrated as my back hit the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't real. The store fell into silence again. I forced myself to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. I opened my eyes. The figure was gone. The aisle was empty. Nothing but neatly stacked shelves and the faint hum of the refrigerators. I let out a shaky breath, forcing my body to move, to do anything other than stand there like a deer in headlights. I bent down, picked up the fallen bag of peas, and threw it onto the shelf. Then, I turned and walked out of the aisle. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to act like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just seen something impossible. But as I stepped onto the main floor, I noticed something else. The air had gotten thicker, heavier, and the dust was everywhere. The once clean floors were now covered in a thin gray layer, as if the store hadn't been cleaned in decades. The shelves, the carts, even my uniform, it was settling on everything, creeping into the corners of my vision, filling my lungs. I coughed, trying to brush it off, but the moment my fingers touched my sleeve, I felt it. Something cold, something watching. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The store was too quiet. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the distant whir of a cooler in the frozen food aisle, and the occasional beep of the price scanner at self-checkout, though no customers were here. The silence pressed in like a weight on my chest. It was past 3 a.m. now, and something was wrong. Mason was missing. He was supposed to be working near the back, stocking shelves in aisle 7. But when I walked past, his cart was there, half empty, his scanner resting on top. It was like he had just walked away in the middle of his task. Jessica stood a few feet behind me, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I could see the way her fingers dug into her sleeves, how she kept shifting on her feet like she wanted to run. "He broke a rule," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "Which one?" Jessica didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to the aisle next to us. Aisle 8, the one everyone avoided. The rule was clear. Do not enter aisle 8 after 3 a.m. My stomach turned. I stepped forward hesitantly and peered around the corner. The aisle looked the same as always. Long shelves packed with canned goods, bottles of sauce, and dusty bags of flour. But something felt off. The air smelled different, stale, like an old basement that hadn't been opened in years. And then I saw it. A pile of clothes at the end of the aisle. I took a slow step forward, my breath shallow. It was Mason's uniform. His red vest, his gray Walmart shirt, even his sneakers. They lay there in a heap, perfectly folded, like someone had taken the time to arrange them neatly. But there was no sign of Mason. My throat went dry. "What the hell?" I whispered. Jessica grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold. "We need to go. Now." I pulled away. "Where is he? Where did he go?" She shook her head, eyes darting around the store. "He's gone, John." She stopped. "It took him." I stared at her. The air around us suddenly felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on my shoulders. "What do you mean it?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. Jessica glanced toward the ceiling, her face pale. "The store," she whispered. "It takes people who break the rules." I looked back at Mason's uniform. There was something strange about it, something I hadn't noticed at first. Dust. A fine layer of gray dust covered his clothes. Not just a little thick, heavy, almost like ash. I crouched down and hesitantly reached out. My fingers brushed against the fabric, and an awful coldness spread up my arm. It wasn't normal cold. It felt like something was pulling at me, dragging at my skin. My vision blurred for half a second, and in that brief moment, I swore I saw something. A figure, tall, thin, standing in the darkness at the far end of the aisle. Its body wasn't solid. It shifted like smoke caught in a slow breeze. Its face was indistinct, but I could feel it staring at me, watching, waiting. The lights flickered. Jessica yanked me back, breaking whatever grip the thing had on me. "Don't look at it," she hissed. My breath came in short gasps. The thing at the end of the aisle didn't move, but I could feel its presence pressing against my mind, like it was memorizing me. "We have to go," Jessica said, already backing away. I didn't argue. We left Mason's uniform behind and hurried to the back room, where the other employees were waiting. No one spoke. No one asked what happened, because they already knew. Mason was gone, and by morning, it would be like he never existed. I had to know what was really happening. Every corner of that store felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. The whispers, the dust, it was all too much to ignore now. I had seen Mason disappear right before my eyes, and the others acted like it was just another night, like the store wasn't slowly devouring them. I couldn't let it consume me too. I slipped past the registers, careful not to make a sound. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional creak of a shelf or the distant hum of the refrigerators. I knew Mr. Lewis's office was in the back, just past the stockroom, behind a locked door. He was always there when we needed him, but I had a feeling he wasn't going to help me now. The light in the hallway flickered as I crept closer to the office. It was almost as if the store was trying to stop me, like the walls were alive, pushing back against my every step. I reached for the handle of the office door. It was locked, of course, but I wasn't about to let a door stop me now. I pulled out the small paperclip I'd bent earlier in the night. Quietly, I worked it into the lock, my heartbeat thumping in my ears. It only took a few moments, but it felt like hours. Finally, the door clicked open, and I slipped inside. The room was exactly how I'd imagined it. Small, cramped, with a single desk pushed against the far wall. A few boxes and papers cluttered the floor. Mr. Lewis was a man of routine, and the office reflected that. Everything in its place, nothing out of order, except for the file cabinet in the corner. The cabinet was locked, but I wasn't about to leave without answers. My hand shook as I pulled open the drawer, and inside, I found what I was looking for: stacked files, each one labeled with an employee's name. The last names stretched back decades, some of them familiar, others I'd never heard before. I flipped through the files, eyes scanning quickly, but it was one name that caught my attention: Davidson Eugene. I stared at the file. The man had worked here in the 1950s, and it didn't stop there. His file wasn't marked as inactive. No, it said active, just like mine, just like all the others. But Eugene Davidson was supposed to be long gone. So why was his name still in the system? The more I flipped through, the more I found. Every employee, from the 1950s to the present, was listed as active. Everyone. The employees who'd worked here for years. The ones who'd come and gone. Even the ones who'd disappeared. My throat went dry as I felt the weight of the truth pressing down on me. The rules weren't just some strange superstition. They weren't warnings from a paranoid manager. They were the keys to something much darker. This Walmart, it wasn't just a store. It was a prison. A trap. And the people who worked here, we weren't just employees. We were feeding it. I slammed the file shut, my heart racing. A cold chill ran through me. I needed to know more. I needed answers. And then I saw it. On the desk, hidden beneath some papers, was a small, worn-out notebook. The cover was stained with what looked like old ink, or maybe blood. I didn't want to touch it, but I had no choice. I opened the notebook, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was hurried, barely legible, but I could make out the words. The rules must be followed. Do not question the darkness. The store needs you. I flicked through the pages, my fingers trembling as I read each entry. More of the same. The rules were never random. They were set in place to ensure the store kept running, to ensure dust was satisfied, to feed it, to sustain it. And then I found something that sent a shiver down my spine. A list of names. Mason, Eric, Jessica, my co-workers, all listed along with dates, notes that were short but chilling. Disobedience equals consumption. I slammed the notebook closed, the truth sinking in like a weight in my chest. I wasn't just dealing with an angry manager and some weird workplace rules. I was up against something ancient, something hungry that lived in the shadows of Walmart. Dust wasn't just an entity, it was the store itself. And if I didn't follow the rules, I would be the next one to disappear. I had to stop it. I had to break the cycle. But how? How could I fight something that had been feeding off people for decades? And who would believe me if I told them? I put the notebook back where I found it, feeling its weight in my hands. The air in the office had grown colder, heavier. I wasn't alone anymore. I turned around. The door had closed behind me, and in the reflection of the glass window, I saw it. Dust. Shifting. Moving. Watching. It knew I had found the truth. And now, it was coming for me. I could feel the store closing in around me. It wasn't just the aisles that felt longer, the shelves taller, or the lights dimmer. Something was shifting in the air, something I couldn't put my finger on, but felt deep in my bones. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My breath grew heavier, my steps more uncertain. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:15 a.m. The store had always felt strange at night, but tonight, it was different. The rules were suffocating me, pressing against my chest like a weight too heavy to bear. There was no more pretending. No more thinking that this was some weird initiation or urban legend to scare the new guy. I had already broken 2 rules. The whispers had called my name. I had ignored the full shopping cart, and I had seen the figure in aisle 8, watching me. I was already deep into the storm now. The only thing left was to test if breaking them all would actually do something, anything, to end this nightmare. I stood still in the middle of the aisle, feeling my heart thudding in my chest. Every part of me screamed to leave, to walk out, clock out, and never come back. But something told me I wouldn't be allowed that luxury. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I'd heard. The rule about the break? I hadn't taken it. The rule about aisle 8? I'd already been there. The rule about the cart? I had broken that too. There was only one left. The most crucial one of all. Never, under any circumstances, break the rules all at once. I couldn't help it. Something inside me snapped. The terror had built up inside me until I had no more room for fear. I wasn't going to be another worker in the system. I wasn't going to let this place take me without a fight. I walked to the back of the store, my shoes squeaking on the linoleum. My hand reached out, fingers trembling, and I grabbed the stack of dusty rule sheets sitting behind the counter. They'd been there for years, I was sure of it. The paper was yellowed and brittle, but the words still seemed fresh, burned into my brain. Without another thought, I crumpled them up. I threw them into the nearest trash can, my eyes wide with the adrenaline rushing through me. It felt stupid. It felt reckless. But for the first time tonight, I felt something different, a spark of freedom. I could hear the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was almost peaceful, like a lullaby trying to soothe me, but I was too far gone for that now. The store was awake, and I was fully aware of it. A voice broke the silence, low and guttural, so close I could feel it in my bones. "John." I froze. My blood ran cold. That wasn't one of my co-workers. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was just a whisper, a breath. I turned toward aisle 8, feeling my feet move against my will. I didn't know why. I shouldn't have. The air felt thick, like I was wading through molasses. I could feel something moving in the darkness at the end of the aisle, something not quite human. I stepped forward, each movement more hesitant than the last. My breath was shallow, but I couldn't stop myself. I was going to see it all, even if it killed me. When I reached the end of the aisle, I looked around the corner, and there it was. Dust. It wasn't like dust I'd ever seen before. It wasn't something you could just wipe away. It was alive. A swirling mass of shadows and fine particles, shifting and flickering in the dim light like smoke in a dark room. It wasn't contained by the aisles or the walls. It stretched and pulsed like something organic, something hungry. I backed away slowly, but it was too late. The lights flickered out entirely, leaving only the glow of the emergency exit signs. My heart hammered in my chest. My mind was screaming at me to run, to break the rules again, to do anything to escape, but the air felt heavy. Every step I took felt as though the store was dragging me back, pulling me into its depths. The faint whisper came again, this time louder, more urgent. "John, you shouldn't have." I spun around. My breath caught. In the doorway of the stockroom stood Mr. Lewis, his face expressionless, his eyes too cold to be human. "It's too late now," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. The store shifted. The walls seemed to lean inward. The shelves twisted like trees in a storm. The floor beneath my feet cracked with a sound like thunder, and I felt my legs give out from under me, sinking into the earth itself. The aisle stretched into infinity, the shelves towering above me like giant teeth. A cold hand brushed my shoulder, and I jerked around to find myself face to face with dust. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the swirling, suffocating mass of it, closing in. Its dark tendrils reached out, wrapping around me like chains, pulling me toward the heart of the store. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, the store was eerily quiet, the lights back on and flickering gently above me. The shelves stood in their places, just like they always had. But something was different. I felt different. I slowly stood up, my legs shaking. My clothes were covered in dust, my face stiff with something cold. When I looked down, I saw the name tag still attached to my uniform. It read, John Carter, but it didn't feel like it was mine anymore. The store was silent again. No one was in the aisles. There was no one but me, and I knew then that I'd become part of the night shift's endless cycle. I'd broken the rules, and I had paid the price. I heard a door open behind me. A new employee, barely out of high school, stepped through, a hopeful smile on his face. His eyes locked onto me. "Hey, is this where I clock in?" he asked, holding out a clipboard. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. He didn't see the dust in my eyes. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. The cold sweat on the back of my neck had turned into an icy chill that spread across my skin like creeping vines. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the very walls of Walmart were pressing in on me, holding me hostage in its twisted grip. The aisles stretched unnaturally long, the fluorescent lights above flickering in and out of focus, casting grotesque shadows on the floor. Dust was here. I knew it now. I could feel its presence in the very air, thick and oppressive. The store felt alive, like a predator circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had broken every rule, every single one. I had ignored them all, thinking I could outsmart whatever haunted this place. But it was clear now, the store wasn't just haunted. It was a trap, a place meant to keep you locked in, forever. And I had no way of knowing if I'd even make it out alive. I stumbled back toward the exit, the door that had been my only hope for escape. But the handle wouldn't turn. It was like the door itself had become part of the store, unwilling to let me leave. I yanked on it, my hands growing sweaty and desperate, but it wouldn't budge. My breath came out in ragged gasps. I knew it. This was it. I was going to die in here, just like the others. I turned around slowly, the air growing even heavier. My body felt like it was moving in slow motion, like the very space around me had thickened, refusing to let me move freely. And then I saw it. A shadow. A figure. It was tall, standing perfectly still, its form barely noticeable against the backdrop of the endless shelves. But it wasn't just any figure. I knew who it was without even needing to see its face. It was Dust, the thing that had haunted these aisles, that had driven everyone mad. I felt a pang of fear, a rush of cold panic rising in my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat was dry, constricted. I could feel the weight of its gaze on me, even though I couldn't see its eyes. It was like the darkness itself was alive, watching, judging. In the silence, I heard a faint whisper, a voice, soft but insistent, calling my name. "John." I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, I wouldn't fall for it. Not again. I had heard that voice before, in the aisles and the shadows. It was the thing that had been tempting me, guiding me to make my mistakes. I refused to listen. I refused to believe it could control me. The voice came again, this time louder, clearer. "John, follow the rules. It's the only way. You have no choice." My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I had thought breaking the rules would set me free. I thought I could defeat this thing. But now I understood. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were chains, keeping the store alive, keeping Dust alive. They were the only thing holding back whatever terrible force had been here for decades. And if I kept breaking them, I would become part of it. It wasn't a choice at all. It never had been. I realized then that the store had been leading me into this moment from the very beginning. Every strange rule, every eerie occurrence, it was all a test. And I had failed. But was it too late? Could I still escape this place, this nightmare? I took a deep breath, my thoughts rushing in every direction. I had one last option, one final choice. I could submit. I could follow the rules, live out the rest of my life, stocking shelves and keeping my head down, praying that Dust would leave me alone. I could become another nameless worker, another part of the store's twisted machinery. I'd be safe, for now. Or I could keep breaking the rules. I could continue to fight, to resist, even if it meant that Dust would come for me, that the store would swallow me whole. I could die trying to escape, or I could disappear into the madness of this place, forever. I didn't know if there was any real way out, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to give up just yet. With a shaky breath, I made my decision. I turned away from the door, from the safety of the outside world, and faced the heart of the store. Let's see what happens if I break every last rule, I whispered to myself. Let's see if you can kill me, Dust. The darkness shifted, swirling around me like a storm. I could feel the air crackling with tension, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. I was either going to escape, or I was going to become part of this nightmare, forever. I woke up in the back room of Walmart, but not like I thought I would. It wasn't the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above me, or the familiar scent of stale air and cardboard boxes that greeted me. It was nothing. There was no sound, no movement, no sense of time at all. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the rough texture of my fingertips against my skin. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. My chest tightened as if I had just woken from a nightmare that I couldn't remember. The walls around me seemed to pulse, as if the store was breathing, alive. I stood up, the fluorescent lights flickering to life around me. The same familiar rows of shelves stretched out before me. The same dusty aisles and faded labels on cans that I had stocked countless times before. But something felt off. It didn't take long for me to notice. I wasn't alone. A figure stood near the far corner of the back room. It was a new face, someone I'd never seen before. His name tag read Nathan in bold block letters. He stood perfectly still, eyes forward, as if he was waiting for something or someone. I felt a chill creep up my spine, and I instinctively took a step back. But then, the memory hit me. Nathan was me. I had worked my shift, broken the rules, and confronted dust. I remembered running, the store shifting around me like a maze, and then darkness. Everything had gone dark. But now here I was again. Nathan turned his head slowly toward me. His eyes were wide, vacant, just like mine had been when I had first entered this place. "You ready to start your shift?" he asked in a voice that sounded wrong, like it had been dragged through an old tape recorder. I couldn't speak. The words caught in my throat. Everything felt like I was trapped in a loop, a never-ending cycle that wouldn't let me out. The same rules, the same eerie whispers, the same dusty shelves. Was this all there was now? Behind Nathan, a shelf creaked as it shifted, and the low hum of the lights buzzed in my ears. I turned toward the back office, where the manager's desk sat, but the door was ajar. Inside, I saw the same uniform I had worn, the one I never took off even in death, it seemed. I walked over, drawn to it. The name tag on the uniform was still attached. I reached out, running my fingers over the fabric, but before I could touch it, the door clicked shut behind me. I turned in alarm, but there, standing in the doorway, was Mr. Lewis, his face stiff, the same unblinking smile stretching across his features. "You're here now," he said, his voice low and mechanical. "It's your turn." The chill swept over me again, heavier this time. He was smiling at me, but there was no warmth in it, no compassion, no humanity. I had become part of the store, just like the others before me. But what about the ones who had come before? I wanted to scream, to break free, but I could only hear the sound of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. I could feel dust lurking just out of sight, always watching, waiting. "You'll learn the rules soon enough," Mr. Lewis continued, stepping aside to reveal the old list of instructions sitting on the desk. I couldn't breathe. "They're simple, really. Just follow them, and you'll fit in perfectly." He handed me the list. My hand shook as I took it, but it felt familiar, like something I'd known my entire life. The same damned rules I had once dismissed. Never stock in aisle 8 after 3 a.m. Don't look inside the shopping cart. Never, ever answer when your name is whispered. The words blurred together as I read them. They made sense now, more than they ever had. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were the way to survive. I glanced up at Mr. Lewis, his smile still intact. "You'll understand in time," he whispered, his voice dipping lower than before. "Everyone does." In the corner of the room, Nathan stood, silently watching. I could see the faint dust settling on his uniform. It wasn't the kind of dust that settled naturally, though. It was the kind that stuck to everything it touched, a kind that never left. I swallowed hard and looked at the uniform hanging in the back room. It was mine, it had to be, but I had become it now. I had joined the cycle. Mr. Lewis stepped closer, his breath cold. "Welcome to your new home, John," he said. And then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, I donned the uniform. The rules had been passed down, and now they were mine. Forever.